We begin today's shiur 6 lines from the top of Daf Mem Beis. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah, V'chein sha'ar kol hanoshim. We had learned in our previous shiur the need for a Yevamos to wait 3 months after the death of her husband before she could marry or do chalitza with the brother, her husband's surviving brother. The reason for the need for waiting was part of the discussion that we saw in our previous year. We need to establish whether or not the pregnancy that she might have experienced is a pregnancy from the first husband, and if that's the case, so she would be forbidden to do yibum with the second husband. If after 3 months she shows no signs of pregnancy, so we can say she can then do yibum or chalitza. What about other women that had been married? Do they need to wait 3 months? So the Gemara, the Mishnah says, yes, other women as well. Bishlama Yevamos kedamoran. I understand the need for waiting 3 months before a woman marries through yibum, as we have already said. Eloshar kol hanoshim amai. Why is there the need of waiting 3 months after a woman becomes a divorcee or a widow outside of the context of yibum? In order to answer this, you'll notice we have triangles. There are 2 approaches to this. And this we've indicated under the Mivneh heading on the side of the Gemara, Hezberim lahamtona gimel chadoshim b'shar noshim. Hezberim, explanations for the need for waiting 3 months with regard to the marriage of other women. Other meaning outside the context of yibum. Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Shmuel. Mishum di Omar Kro. The pasuk says, Liyos l'chol l'lukim u'l'zaracho acharecha. The Rashi says, u'l'zaracho acharecha she'ein hashchina shura elo al havadoyim shezaro miyuchas acharov. The Almighty's divine presence does not dwell on those that do not have a sure ancestry. We want to make sure shezaro miyuchas acharov, that the seed is associated, is attached with its forebears, so that only if children know who their fathers are, then we can say that such a community, such an assembly, such a nation will merit the divine presence. So that from this pasuk we learn lahavchin bein zaro shel rishon lezaro shel sheni. It's important for us to distinguish between the seed of the first husband and the seed of the second husband. And in order to achieve that distinction, the woman between husband 1 and husband 2 must wait 3 months. It takes 3 months for the signs of pregnancy to manifest themselves. Mosiv Rava. Rava raises an objection. If the whole reason for waiting 3 months is only in order to establish who the father is, Lefikach ger v'giores tzrichin lahamtin shlosha chadoshim. The Tanaic source that Rava quotes refers to a couple that had converted to Judaism. A non-Jewish couple that convert together, they have to wait 3 months. In other words, they have to separate themselves from one another for 3 months. Hacha mai lahavchin ika. Here, what's the lahavchin? What's the doubt? You only have the husband and wife, this couple. There isn't a first husband and a second husband, so why is there the need for them separating from one another and waiting 3 months before they can cohabit once again. The Gemara answers, Hochinami, Ika, here too there is lahavchin, an element of distinguishing bein zera shenizra b'kedusha, lezera sheloi nizra b'kedusha, between a impregnation, a pregnancy that was caused in a state of their kedusha, of their holiness, after having entered the Jewish people, versus a pregnancy that was caused in a state of shaloi b'kedusha, in their pre-Jewish state. So it's important for distinction purposes, whether it be between husband 1 and husband 2, or between pre-Jewish state versus post-Jewish state. Rava Omar. Rava has a second approach. Gzeira Shemo Yisa Es Achoisoi Me'aviv V'yibein. And we should point out there are 4 points that Rava makes why it's necessary to wait 3 months. And we'll go through the 4 points of Rava in the Gemara text and then look at Rashi's explanation. So number 1 is Gzeira Shemo Yisa Es Achoisoi Me'aviv V'yibein Eshes Achiv Me'imoi V'yoytzi Es Imoi Lashuk V'yiftar Es Yevimto Lashuk. Now, of course, just looking at the words of the Gemara, one would be hard-pressed to find an explanation other than looking immediately at Rashi. So now we look at the Rashi, a few lines up from here. Rava Omar, Shema Isa Achoiso Me'aviv, Im Nises Toich Shloisha. If a woman marries a second man within 3 months of her having parted from the first one, and then V'yolda V'hu ben Tisha L'Rishon V'nolad B'veiso Shel Sheni. So if she, let us say, does not wait 3 months and then gives birth, let us say 7 months later, and in actuality it's a full-term pregnancy from the first husband. The birth, though, takes place while she's married to the second husband. V'savor shehu beno. The birth having taken place in the house of the second man will lead him to think that this is his actual son. V'yisa es bas bailo harishon sheyesh lo mi'isha acheres. And this boy might end up marrying a daughter of the first husband that he bore through another woman. And so that if that were actually the case, this boy and that girl are not related to one another. But in reality, v'hi achoiso minoav. This boy is actually a 9-month pregnancy from the first husband, and when he marries that man's daughter that he had from another marriage, you'll have really a brother and sister through common father marrying one another. So that's the first point of Rava, why it's important for us to establish whether or not the woman is pregnant, because otherwise, if you don't wait the 3 months, you can end up having this situation of a brother and sister marrying. The next Rashi, Umiyabem Eishes Ochiv Me'imoy She'im Teleid Le'acharoin Ben Acher V'yisa Isha V'yomos Below Bonim. If the second husband has another child, a regular son of his, and that son ends up marrying a woman and not having children, and dying without having children, leaving a widow. V'yivmeno zeh. And this one, thinking that he's kasaper shu ochiv me'aviv, this boy who was born 7 months after the marriage to the second husband, thinking that he is the son of that second man, hence the brother of this fellow that just died, leaving no children. V'nimtzu miyabem eshes ochiv me'imo shelo me'aviv. He'll end up marrying a brother from a common mother. It's the same mother. She left husband one, married husband two, 7 months later bearing this living child. And she also happened to bear a second child with husband number two, quite literally. The living brother thinks that this is a brother that the brother that died is a brother from a common father as well, when that's not the case. They are brothers from a common mother. And marrying the widow of that second son would be an Easter Doraisa of a Chayiv Kores. It's Chayiv the severe Kores penalty. Once again, this all results from her not having waited the 3 months to establish her pregnancy, giving room to think that the first child she bore in the presence of the second husband is from him. The next case that Rava mentioned, v'yoytzi es imoi lashut, im loy teleid imoi lasheni. If this woman that didn't wait and married the second husband doesn't bear any more children from the second husband, Yevamos, and that second husband dies, people will think that this son is his son. And the mother, the woman that didn't wait, she'll end up marrying someone else without having received chalitza, without being released when she really needed chalitza. Number 4, v'yiftor es yevimto lashuk. Im yesh lo ach me'oviv harishon, v'lo hoyu loi bonim umeis. If the first husband had a son, and that son died leaving no children, the ein shom ach elohu, there is no other brother other than this one, and he thinks that he's the son of the second man. The brother of the son of that first man that just died, the son that just died, the public thinks that he died leaving no brothers. The widow of the son of that first man, Hazukuka lo, who really is bound to the son that came from the woman not having waited, she's going to end up marrying out to the public without having the chalitza ceremony, which she actually needs. We continue now in the Gemara. Mosiv Rav Chananya. Bekulan anikori bohen. That means Bekula means regarding all the women that the Chachomim forbade to marry and do Yibum within the 3 months. So regarding all of them, anikori bohen mishum takonas erva. It's designed to solve a problem of erva. The kan mishum takonas vlad. Now, let's go over what we said just to correct ourselves. We made an error. This source began with the word bekulon. That's a reference to all women that the Chachomim forbid to wed or to do yibum with. All of those forbidden relations are in order to make sure that there is no erva problem. Now, v'kan, this word v'kan indicates the women regarding whom we have the need to wait 3 months. Mishum takonas vlad, that's for the benefit of establishing who the father of the offspring is. The Rashi says, "V'kan b'hamtona shel gimel chadoshim sh'osru chachomim l'sh'ar noshim." The takona that has been established regarding other women outside the realm of Yibum. Ein kan takonas erva, elo takonas vlad. Lahavchin ben mihu. We continue in the Gemara. Ve'im isa, if it is as we just learned, that the Chachomim were worried about a person ending up marrying a sister from a common father, like we saw under Rava number 1. So if Rava's explanation for the need of waiting 3 months is an explanation that we shall accept, then kulhu mishum takonas erva, the prohibition of a brother and sister marrying one another is an erva problem. Erva is the realm of forbidden relations. So that if Rava's explanation of the need for waiting 3 months is to be accepted, then this source would pose a problem, because this source is saying that the need for waiting is in order to establish who the father is. But the outcome would also be an issue of takonas erva, to prevent a brother from marrying a sister from a common father. The Gemara answers, Hai mishum takonas vlad. The explanation of the words takonas vlad in this source, in fact, is the lo lifga behu erva, so that when the children are born, those children shouldn't come to a problem of erva. So then you might ask, what's the difference between the second part of the Tanaic source and the first part of the Tanaic source? So Rashi explains, the lo livga vlad be'erva. Rashi continues, avol kol shar hane'esoros, the other prohibited relationships, iko takonas hi ubal atzmoi, the livgu be'erva, where we speak about the prohibition of others doing nisuin or yibum. There we're interested in preventing the couple themselves from being from violating the rules of isurei erva, as opposed to the laws of hamtona. Those are designed to protect the children from isurei erva. Hence the distinction between the reisha and the seifa. As we continue in the Gemara, we notice on the side a topic, heading, and structural note combined, where you'll see a double underline featured. The double underline is one of our series markings. These are hatzos acheros, alternative suggestions, litkufas amtona, for the term of delay, of pause or waiting between first husband and second husband, or first man and second man. Loma amru dafka shloisha chadashim. Why is the figure of 3 months specifically required? The Gemara. And note that this is a long question. Bishlama tamtin shnei chadashim v'tinose loy. We understand why it would be incorrect to wait 2 months and then marry. Dahainu sveika. This gives rise to the very doubt that we were describing before. If she were to wait 2 months and then give birth 7 months later, that is the doubt. I bar tisha lekama. Is this a 9-month pregnancy from the first husband, and when she cohabited with the second husband, she was in actuality 2 months pregnant. Ibar Shiva Labasra, or it's a 7-month pregnancy resulting from the second husband. So that's why it's clear that we wouldn't allow a woman to marry a second husband after a pause of 2 months. Ela tamtin chodesh echad v'tinaseh. Why not have her wait 1 month and then marry? V'i l'shiva yalda, if 7 months later she gives birth, hai bar shiva lebasrahu, then it's clearly the second man's child resulting from a 7-month pregnancy. V'i l'tamne yalda, if she gives birth after 8 months, hai bar tisha l'kamahu, then it's clear that it's a 9-month pregnancy, her having been pregnant 1 month from the first husband, and 8 months later, her giving birth 8 months after she marries the second husband. So this is a 9-month pregnancy from the first husband. Why is that not sufficient? The Gemara answers, Inami l'tamya yolda, even if she gives birth after 8 months, Ika l'meimar, there is still doubt. There is room to suggest the basra who? It's a child from the second husband. Dilma ishtauye ishta chodesh echad v'aber. It could be that she didn't become impregnated immediately from the second husband. And it took a month for her to become pregnant. Many women don't become pregnant as soon as they marry their husbands. It takes a while. It could take a month till she starts her pregnancy. So a birth 8 months after having married the second husband is not going to show with definitiveness that it's a child from the first husband. Another suggestion: the tamtin shnei chadoshim umechza b'tinaseh. Why should we not allow her to marry the second husband after 2.5 months of waiting? In l'shiva yolda, if 7 months after her marriage to the second husband, she gives birth, hai bar shiva labasra hu. This is a 7-month pregnancy from the second husband. V'i l'shisa upalga yolda, if after a mere 6.5 months after her second marriage she gives birth, hai bar tisha l'kamahu. This is a 9-month pregnancy from the first husband. Di bar basrahu, if it were a pregnancy resulting from the second man, bar shiso pagalohai, a 6.5 month pregnancy will not live. The Gemara answers, no, there still is an element of doubt. Inami l'shiso palga yolda, even if she does give birth 6.5 months later, ika l'meimar debasrahu, there's still room to think that it is from the second husband. The Omar Mar Zutra, afilu l'man the Omar yoledis l'tisha, eino yoledis l'mekutoyin, even according to the opinion in Maseches Nida, that a woman who gives birth after 9 months, a 9-month pregnancy must be a complete 9 months. That's eino yoledis l'mekutoyin. She doesn't give birth after a fraction, a fractionalized, we'll say 9 months. However, yolda l'shiva, a 7-month pregnancy, yoledis l'mekutoyin, does result or does give birth. A 7-month pregnancy does bear a child, even if it's not a complete 7 months. Shneimar, the pasuk indicates such a phenomenon. Vahilu tkufos hayomim. This is a pasuk in the context of the birth of Shmuel Hanavi, and it says, after Tkufos Hayomim, he was born. Miu Tkufos Shnayim. The term Tkufa is often translated as a season. There are 4 seasons in the year, each one 3 months. So 2 Tkufos would be a total of 6 months. Miut Yomim Shnayim, the minimum plural of days. When the pasuk says days, so there's the plural. What's the minimum of that? 2. 2 is the smallest number of pluralness. So the minimum number of plural of days is 2. 6 months and 2 days. So we see that a 7-month pregnancy is simply a complete 6 months plus a little bit, so that the last suggestion would not result in our achieving clarity in the event that she would give birth 6.5 months after her marriage to the second husband. That would not establish that the child is clearly a child of the first man. V'tamtin mashehu v'tinaseh. Why not have the woman wait a little bit, meaning a week or 2 weeks, and then marry the second husband? V'chimalu shloisha chadashim livdika. And when 3 months go by from her having been with her first husband, we would then check her out, physically check her out. Rashi explains V'chimalu on the second line the second wide line under the Gemara text. V'chimalu shlosha chadashim liyoim mises baila. 3 months after the death of her first husband, shederech ubar liosnikur. It's at that point that a pregnancy becomes visible. Livdika b'dodeha. Check her breasts. Kederech noshim. There's a change in the appearance. V'i me'abra v'adei bar kamo. If the difference between a state of pregnancy and a non-pregnancy is visible, so then it's definitely the son of the first. It's a pregnancy from the first man. The bar basrahu, if it were an impregnation from the second man, akati lo haviminkar. She hasn't been with the second man for 3 months. It's only 2.5 months that she's been with the second husband, because we're checking her once again 3 months after the death of the first husband. Having waited just a week or 2, her tenure with the second husband hasn't reached 3 months. So if something is visible upon this particular checking, it's clear that it's a pregnancy from the first man. You don't have 3 months from her marriage to the second man. That little amount of time, that week or 2 that she waited, is missing. And if that siman that we just referred to, b'dodel, is not visible, so then and then later on it becomes visible, it's clear, as Rashi says, it then would show us clearly that this is a child of the second husband. The Gemara continues, Omar of Safra, Ein boikin es hanesuos shelo yisganu al balehen. There's a rule, and it's a rule of derech eretz, if you will, that we don't check married women out. We don't subject them to this type of checking, because that will cause their husbands to find disfavor, that it creates a situation of marital strain if you do this. Question, v'nivdika v'hilucha. Don't subject her to that particular checking that we mentioned. Just watch the way she walks. Rashi explains, v'hilucha molichin oisa b'ofer tichuach. Have her walk over some loose dirt. If she is pregnant, the footsteps will leave a deeper impression in the sand and the dirt than other women. The child causes increased weight of the woman. the Gemara continues. Why is it that we don't practice this? Once again, waiting just a mashahu from the death of the first husband, waiting a week or two from the death of the first husband. After that, she would then marry, and then 3 months after the death of the first husband, have her walk through the sand. Omar Rami Bar Chama, Isha Mechapa Atzma. A woman will cover her tracks. Here it's quite literally. She will do something to make sure that her pregnancy is not noticeable, so that people will get the impression that this is not a child from the first husband, but a child from the second husband, so that ultimately he will inherit from him. At this point then, we've established why the 3-month period of waiting is the necessary amount, and any lessening of that would leave us still in a state of doubt. The Gemara asks another question in this context, but before we do that, we look at the side of the Gemara where we have a nosei, a topic heading, where you have a situation that there isn't any need to distinguish, to establish who the father is. A case of a woman who's pregnant already, or she's nursing a child, umeis baila, and her husband dies. Why can't a woman like that marry a second man immediately? The Gemara, where we know that she's pregnant, so there's no issue of doubt concerning who the father is. Let her marry immediately. Aloma Tanya, why then is it taught the following in the Tanaic source? Lo yisa adam uberes chaveru menekes chaveru. A person shall not marry a woman who is impregnated by someone else or is nursing someone else's child. V'im nosa, and if he does, yoitzi v'lo yachzor ilamis. If he does marry her without waiting the necessary amount of time, he must divorce her and never take her back. Why this severity? The Gemara answers, Gzera shemo tase ubra sandal. If a man marries a woman who is already pregnant and he impregnates her as well while she's still pregnant, the development of the second child can end up crushing the first child, making him into a sandal, a type of flattened out fetus. The Gemara asks, Ihachi didei nami. Well, if that's the case, then any husband and wife, if the wife is pregnant, why is the husband allowed to cohabit with her? Is there not the problem that she might become pregnant again, and the child will become, the first fetus will become a sandal? The Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, says, Didei nami, lo yishamesh im ishto muberes, shemo tachser b'tesaver, v'yitchok ochiv v'imach tsuras panav kesandal hazeh, she'ein lo tsura. The Gemara answers why, when it comes to a husband and wife, we're not worried about this. I l'man damar b'moich b'moich, v'i l'man damar min ha-shamayim yirachamu, min ha-shamayim yirachamu. There are 2 approaches that is taken to this topic. One is that we will tell the woman when she's pregnant, she is allowed to use a contraceptive, which is generally speaking frowned upon in halacha, but when there is a necessity like this, so we allow her to use that. The moch is technically a piece of highly absorbent material that she inserts into her body that will absorb the semen and not prevent her from becoming pregnant. In this case, a second pregnancy will not be able to set in. Another approach says that heaven will have mercy and that the couple the husband and wife will continue their intimacy and heaven will protect the fetus. So that's those are two responses that we give when it comes to a husband and wife. But those approaches would not be acceptable with regard to her marrying a second husband. We continue in the Gemara. While it asks that very question, Hochanami, here too, why not allow her? She's pregnant, and it's clear she's pregnant from the first husband because 3 months have lapsed. Let her marry a second husband. Why can't we accept those approaches to enable her to marry a second man, and we'll be able to protect the fetus? Elo, do you know why? Mishum dachasa. We don't want a woman who is pregnant, who's clearly pregnant, to marry a new man, a second husband, because the couple, in the state of intimacy, he might end up crushing the child, the fetus, through body pressure. The Gemara asks, if that is a concern, didei nami, a husband and wife, how is it that they are able to engage in intimacy when after she's already pregnant? Is he not going, as the husband / father, not going to crush this fetus? Didei chayes iluya. When it comes to one's own child, he'll be careful. And the Gemara asks, well, hachanami chayes iluya. So too with regard to the second husband, let her remarry in a state of pregnancy, and the second husband will be careful not to crush the child. The Rashi adds to this, hachanami chayes iluya. Shein adam miskaven la'arog hanefesh. There's no reason for us to think that the second husband will intentionally try to crush the pregnancy that she has from the first husband. So why is it that a pregnant woman, who is again clearly pregnant, and the father is clear that it's the first husband dies, why does she have to wait? Why can't she marry a second husband immediately? Elo stam meuberes lemanika kaima. A pregnant woman is assumed to be one who will nurse her newborn. The Gemara continues at the top of Amid Beis. Dilma iabra u'ma'akir chalba v'katlole. If she doesn't wait the required amount of time, we're afraid that after she gives birth to the pregnancy that she has right now, she will become pregnant from the new husband, and a woman who becomes pregnant while nursing, that causes the milk supply to dry up, so to speak. And as a result of that, of the milk, we'll say the milk going bad, the child will die. Well, if that be the case, husband and wife that produced a child, why is it that we allow them to continue together in intimacy? Might she not become pregnant again, a second pregnancy, while she's nursing their first child, and the second pregnancy will stop the milk supply, and the child that they had together will die? The Gemara answers, Didei mimas misole bebeitzim v'cholav. When it comes to a regular husband and wife couple, and the couple had a child, and they continue cohabiting, and a second pregnancy sets in, and the milk supply of the first child dries up, the father will go out of his way to provide milk alternatives. Today we have all types of nursing formulas. In the Gemara's time, it was a formula made of milk and eggs. So the alternative milk supply will be provided. The Gemara asks, Dido nami mimas mesolei bebeitzim v'chalav. Let a woman whose husband died marry immediately in her state of pregnancy. The child will be born. She might become pregnant with the second child from the new husband. Her milk supply will dry up, so the second husband will supply the nursing formula for her first child, the child that she had from the first husband. The Gemara says, Lo Yohav Lo Baal. The new husband it's not his own son, it's not his own child. He's not going to provide sustenance for that infant. It's not his. Question. V'litpeine liyorshim. Why doesn't the woman seek out the finances necessary for providing an alternative milk supply from the heirs? After all, she has a child that was fathered by a man, the first husband. That man died, leaving, we'll assume he left some type of estate. The child is really first in line of inheritance, but he wasn't born when he died, so there's an estate that exists that others took hold of, and she could go turn to them with the claim that you have property that rightfully belongs to this child, and he needs support for providing the formula. And now we have an amazingly insightful, deep recognition of human psyche, and more particularly female psyche, and how far it goes. What was the suggestion just now? Let the woman marry, in her state of pregnancy, a second man, and as far as the welfare of the child that she had was impregnated with by the first husband, and hence it's the deceased's child, there should be no problem. She should be able to go to court and seek compensation from the heirs. Omar Abaye, Isha Bosha Lavola Bezdin, Vahoreges Espinah. In order for the woman to extract funds from the other heirs, she'll have to make a court appearance. A woman finds that embarrassing. So much so that she, in order to preserve her own perception of dignity, she will go so far in that capacity, even though the result would be the death of her own son. This is something that we must bear in mind beyond the scope of this particular Daf Gemara. The concept of dignity and of shame, and how far that could drive a person. There is much more to say on the topic, but in the confines of a Daf Yomi shir, we must continue. Achas besulos v'achas beulos. The Mishnah went on to say, echad nesuos v'echad v'achas arusos. All kinds of women must wait, whether they are virgin or whether they have been already in intimacy with a man, whether they're divorced, whether they're widowed, whether they're nisuos, whether they became widowed from a state of nisuin, from a state of having consummated their marriage, the echad arusos, or whether they had not consummated their marriage. The Gemara feels that there is an element of redundancy in the Mishnah. Hey nihu besulos vehei nihu arusos. These two categories are really one and the same. A basula is a virgin woman. You can't have the case of a virgin, let's say Yevama, if not for her becoming a Yevama through the death of her husband while she was still an arusa. An arusa, and we've said this many times in the past, is the first of two stages that lead to full marriage. An arusa is a situation where the couple have married one another. Sometimes the term betrothed is used. Money was given by the man to the woman. She becomes what's known as an ashes ish. She's considered married, but they haven't consummated their marriage through intimacy yet. So an arusa that happens to be a vama would also be a basula. She's still a virgin. So why does the Mishnah use the term basulos and arusas when one term would have been enough? Likewise, hey nihu beulos, v'hei nihu nesuos. The term beulos is a reference to a woman that has already consummated their marriage. So is that not one in the same with a nesuah? Beulos literally means a woman that has experienced intimacy. So what kind of woman would become a Yevama having experienced intimacy if not for the fact that she happens to be a nesuah? She had consummated her marriage with the first husband. So why the double expression? Omar Rav Yehuda, Hochi Komar. The Mishnah is to be understood thusly. Before we continue in the text itself, let's look at the Rashi. We're looking in the Rashi, the upper part of the narrow lines. Hochi Komar, Klomar. Lo tisni achas achas. Don't include the words achas. As you see, the term achas appeared a number of times in the original Mishnah text. So don't read the Mishnah like that. The mashma trei mili, because the word achas each time appears to separate, causing a separate category. Elakula chado katoni. Rather, it's to be understood as one we'll say lengthy sentence. Upirushe komaforesh. And what the Mishnah is doing is it is explaining itself. Achas besulos v'achas bulos. That's the headline of the Mishnah. Ukagon shenis armalu oinis garshu bein mino erisin dainu besulos. The term besulos that opens this section of the Mishnah is explained by the continuation of the Mishnah. For example, what would a besula be? Well, it would be a case where she became widowed or divorced from the state of erusin. Bein mino nisuin, or if she became divorced or widowed from the state of nisuin, that is the hainu bulos. That is what the term bulos was referring to in the beginning of the Mishnah, of that section of the Mishnah. So now we go back to the Gemara text where this appears. Omar Yehuda Hochi Komar. Understand the Mishnah thusly: Achas besulos va'achas beulos, whether they be virgin or non-virgin. She nisarmalu oy shenisgarshu bein mino erusin bein minanesuin. The bein mino erusin, namely became widowed or divorced from their original erusin state, that would be the explanation of besulos. Whether they became widowed or divorced from the state of nisuin, that explains beulos. Continuing in the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar lo armu lebei midrasha. On one occasion, Rabbi Elazar did not go to the base medrash, to the place of Torah study. Ashkei Ravasi. So he met up with Ravasi. Omar lei, Rabbi Elazar asks, Mein omur rabbonon bebei midrasha. What did the rabbis say today in the base medrash? Omar lei, Hochi Omar Rav Yochanan. So Ravasi tells him, thusly said Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha kerebi Yosi. The halacha follows the ruling of Rabbi Yosi that all women can enter nisuin immediately. Enter erusin, a very important correction there. Enter erusin immediately. Before we continue in the Gemara, we should just note that we have a topic heading on the side, the Nosei, Birur Psak Shel Rabbi Yochanan. We're trying to clarify Rabbi Yochanan's ruling, Ha'im hu posek Rabbi Yossi demati l'chol anoshim l'sares miyad. Does he, Rabbi Yochanan, actually rule like Rabbi Yossi, that allows all women to enter erusin with a new husband immediately without any need for a waiting period? Now, let us also look at the Rashi. Halacha Rabbi Yossi, Rashi across from here, a couple lines up, he says, Deshori arusos linose. Rabbi Yossi also allows a woman who became either divorced or widowed from a state of erusin with her first husband, she can enter nisuin with a second husband immediately. Since she had not cohabited with the first husband, so there's no doubt or suspicion of zera, of seed, of child being from the first man. She was only an arusa with him. Another point of Rabbi Yossi is nisua li'ores. Rabbi Yossi rules that a woman who had been a nisua, she can enter erusin with a second husband immediately. Because in that situation, we're not getting into a problem of havchona zera. All we're allowing her to do is the first stage of marriage with the new husband. Rabbi Yossi v'lo Rabbi Yehuda, to Rabbi Yehuda nami shori arusa linose behedya, el mishum to Rabbi Yossi mimuko imo. Rashi points out that in truth we could have had a ruling like Rabbi Yehuda and come to the same conclusion, who allows an arusa to enter nisuin immediately. But we prefer to cite Rabbi Yossi as the source of psak, because when Rabbi Yossi appears, the halacha will follow his ruling, because nimuko imo, he rules after deep thought and sources for his rulings. So now we continue in the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan ruled like Rabbi Yossi. That's what Rav Asi told Rabbi Elazar. Michlal, should we infer from here the Yechidah Polig Olei, that the Tanakama, the first opinion in the Mishnah that argues with Rabbi Yossi, that insisted on all women, whether they had been in a state of erusin or nisuin with their first husbands, they cannot make any new marriage move until the waiting period is experienced. So that opinion, which appeared without a name, we should assume, and this is what he is asking, this is what the Gemara is raising as a question, should we then assume that opinion, we'll call it the restrictive opinion, is really the opinion of a single rabbi, as opposed to a type of ruling of the chachomim, of a majority type ruling? In other words, for Rabbi Yochanan to paskin like Rabbi Yossi, it would indicate that the alternative opinion was really a single opinion of a single rabbi and not a majority opinion. Otherwise, it would be difficult to accept a ruling like a shitas yachid over a rabbin. So, by virtue of Rav Yochanan passing Rav Yossi, would lead us to believe that the alternative pshat was a yochidah. Yochidah means single opinion. The Gemara says, that is correct, v'hatanya, and we will now show that through the following brisa. Once again, we're going to see in this brisa the concept of waiting as applying across the boards as the opinion of, we'll see, Rabbi Meir, who is a single opinion. And hence, the opinion that differs with him, which we'll see is Rabbi Yossi, who allows an entrance into a second state of matrimony immediately. In fact, Rabbi Yossi is then arguing only with Rabbi Meir, making it much easier to paskin like Rabbi Yossi being that it's Rav Yossi against another single authority and not a majority opinion. So here is the Brisa. Harei shoyse redufa leilech lebeis avia. A woman who was very often, very commonly by her father. We're talking about a married woman who was not with her husband. Rashi says redufa regila. Redufa means on a regular basis. V'gam somuch l'misasoi omden lebeis avia. And also close to the death of her first husband, she wasn't with him. She was by her father's man ruba, a long time. The lekol ameima beresi, leaving no room for thinking that she might be pregnant. So you have a description of a woman that's hasn't been with her husband for quite a while. The text continues. Or she was fighting with her husband, and hence she wasn't going to be in a state of intimacy with him. Or her husband was incarcerated in a beis hasrum, in a prison. Or the husband was aged or infirmed. Or she was sickly, not capable of becoming pregnant at the time that her husband died. Or after her first husband died, we know she had a miscarriage. Or she was a barren woman, where as a result of her uterus having been extracted from her. Or she's aged. Or she's a minor. Or islandess. A woman who's an islandess is a woman who is born with female defects, and therefore she is not capable of bearing a child. Or because of some other reason, because of having taken some type of poison or illness, she lost her abilities of procreation. All of these women that you can see, there's really no chashash, there's no suspicion that she might be pregnant, but we will not allow them, after leaving their first husband, to marry a second man unless 3 months lapse. Rabbi Yossi matir liores v'linose miyad. Rabbi Yossi, as we already mentioned extensively earlier, he allows for an erusin, that is for a woman that was a nesua, he will allow erusin immediately, and for a woman that was merely an arusa to marry a second man immediately without any waiting. Omer B'chia bar Abba chazar boy Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi B'chia informs us that Rabbi Yochanan reversed his ruling. He reversed his ruling like Rabbi Yossi. Omer Rav Yosef, I hodarbe, if it is so that Rabbi Yochanan reversed his ruling, mimasnisen de karma hodarbe. It's because of a Tanaic source that was taught in Kerem b'Yavne. Yavne was the seat of great Torah learning, and the sages there used to sit in rows, row after row, giving the impression of a vineyard. And the word karma or kerem is a vineyard. So the analogy is to a vineyard because of the fact that they sat in rows. So what was the source that was taught there? Desanya, Omer Bishmael b'nosh Rabbi Yochanan Broika, Shomati mipi chachamim b'kerem b'Yavna. I heard from the sages in the yeshiva of Yavne, Kulon tzrichos lahamtin shloisha chadashim. All women between first husband and second husband, regardless of circumstances, must wait 3 months. And that's not like Rabbi Yossi. Omer le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zrika. Ki ailis lekamei de Rabbi Avo Rami le. When you visit Rabbi Avo, present the following seeming contradiction. Rami le is raise the following difficulty to him. The question here, you notice, takes a couple of lines to develop. Mi Omer Rav Yochanan, halacha Rav Yossi. Would Rav Yochanan have ever ruled that halachas like Rav Yossi, that all women yisarsu, that all women can enter after having been married to a first husband, all women will allow all women to enter erusin with a second husband? The logic behind that type of ruling is, like we've seen before, is that erusin is a first stage of marriage where they're not yet experiencing intimacy, they're not cohabiting with one another. So that with that mindset, you're not really entering any halachic problems, or any, let's say, more than halachic problems, any problems in reality of havchona zera, of confusion regarding who the father might be. But does Rabbi Yochanan rule like that all women can enter a state of erusin with a second husband, immediately? The Omer Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kistam mishnah. But Rabbi Yochanan, the same Rabbi Yochanan, has been known to rule like the unnamed mishnah, the mishnah that appears without a name. And generally speaking, a stam mishnah, a nameless mishnah, is an authoritative source. And what does it say in this nameless mishnah? Utnan, kol hanoshim lo yinasu v'lo yisarsu ad shiyu lohem shloisha chadoshim achas besulos v'achas beulos. Well, that's what we learned in the Mishnah, that all women shall not even enter a state of erusin until the 3-month waiting period lapses. So how can Rabbi Yochanan rule like Rabbi Yossi, who doesn't acknowledge a 3-month waiting period for erusin, and the Stam Mishnah that insists on the 3-month waiting period? How can we resolve these two rulings of Rabbi Yochanan? The Gemara answers, Omar lay. So we have, let's say in this story, we had Rabbi Yirmiyah telling Rabbi Zrika to raise this question to Rabbi Avo. So then Rabbi Avo responds. He says, De Rama Locha, whoever raised this issue with you, in other words, whoever put you up to asking this question, Lo chosh l'kimchei. He's not, here what literally translated means he's not careful about his flour. But that's simply an analogy. Flour is is wheat that's finely ground. So someone who's described as lo chosh l'kimchei means he doesn't analyze his learning, his Torah learning thoroughly. Rabbi Avo continues to explain. Notice, of course, this is a long answer. He continues saying, it's true that there is a Stam Mishnah that says that no woman shall enter erusin between first husband and second husband unless a 3-month waiting period lapses. That's a Stam Mishnah. However, it's a Stam v'achar kach machloikes hi. It's a Stam Mishnah followed by this topic being taught as part of a controversy. And when you have a situation like that a point is mentioned in a nameless, unqualified fashion, but later it's followed by a Mishnah in which that point is presented as the subject of controversy, v'ein halacha kestam, the halacha will not go like the stam. So even though this Stam Mishnah presents something of stringency, of requiring the waiting period, it is not a convincing source by way of a final halachic ruling, because, as we said, it's followed by a machlokes. The Omer Rav Papa b'teimer Rav Yochanan. Rav Papa, some versions have Rav Yochanan teaching the following rules of pshat, of legal decision making. If you have a Mishnah in which a particular point is taught as the subject of controversy, and then one of those opinions is presented later in a nameless source, then the halacha goes like the stam. However, if you reverse the order, stam v'achar kach machloikes, if you have a particular point taught in a nameless, seemingly authoritative fashion in one source, and then later, we'll say later in that tractate, the same topic comes up but is part of a controversy, ein halacha kestam, then the halacha will not follow the stam. And that's what we have over here. Therefore, as far as the pshat of Rabbi Yochanan, with which we opened up our Gemara, namely Rabbi Yochanan ruling like Rabbi Yossi, that remains a fairly solid position to take. Mistamech vazel Rabbi Avo akasvei de Rabbi Nochum Shamei. Rabbi Avo was walking along and leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Nochum, his servant, his shamish. Mankit v'ozil hilchasa minei. Rashi says, "Mankit malakit mimenu halachas psukos halachat kaploni aploni." It seems that Rabbi Nochum was drawing out of Rabbi Avo all kinds of halachic rulings. Bo'amine, he asks, "Machlokes v'achar kach stam mai." What would be the case if you have something taught in a Mishnah as part of a controversy, then it's followed by one of those positions presented in a subsequent Mishnah in a nameless fashion? How are we to rule? Amalei halacha kistam. Just like we saw before, that in such a case, since the stam follows the machlokes, the stam carries the day. You would rule like the stam source. Stam v'achakach machlokes. What happens in a reverse situation? Amalei ein halacha kistam. So a case like that, the halacha will not follow the stam. A third question. Stam odemasnisinu machlokes bebraisa mai. What about a case where a Mishnah teaches something in an unqualified fashion, and that point turns out to be a controversy in a brisa? What is the din? Amalei halacha kistam. We will follow the Mishnah that presented the issue in a nameless, unqualified fashion. A fourth question. Machlokes b'masnisin ustama b'braisa mai. What about a situation where, as far as the Mishnayos are concerned, a particular point of halacha is taught as a controversy, two opinions regarding the matter, and in a braisa we see one of those positions presented in a nameless, seemingly authoritative fashion. In other words, from the perspective of the Mishnayos, the issue was not settled. When you learn the brisa is a body of Tanaic literature that was not formulated directly by Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, but rather was formulated and edited by the next generation, or his students or colleagues, student-colleague type individuals. They include famous people like Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Oshaya, Bar Kapara, and Levi. So if you have a situation where a particular point is part of a machlokes in the Mishnayos, namely the Mishnayos which were edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, there is no seeming clear ruling, and yet clarity is reflected in a brisa. What is the outcome of that? Omar Lei. So Rabbi Avo answers that a situation like that is somewhat untenable, if you will. But he says, "V'chi Rebbe lo shana, Rebbe Chia and Ayalo." If Rebbe, who set up the Mishnayos, didn't teach that, Rashi goes a little further and says on the top, Rebbe shesider as a Mishnah lo shana shtei Mishnah shelo ratza l'sosma. Rebbe, the great Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, for whatever reason he felt he doesn't want to present that point in a conclusive fashion. So if Rebbe didn't present it like that, how could his student, Rabbi Chia, come up with that conclusion and conclusive ruling? So again, if Rebbe didn't teach it, Rabbi Chia, where did Rabbi Chia get it from? In other words, it's a way of saying that you have a situation of something lacking authority. So that even though it's presented in a brisa authored by Rabbi Chia in a stam fashion, that's not convincing. Up till this point, we have been impressed with the conclusiveness of a stam mishnah. We're now going to bring this into question. On the side of the Gemara text, you can see we have a long question marking. On the in the margin, you see we have a tatnose, a sub-topic heading. Tainus Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah mi Maseches Kelim be'inyan Masreik, shenires kistam Mishnah, eino Mishnah. We're going to see a Tanaic source from Maseches Kelim regarding a masreik. Masreik is a comb, and it appears as a stam mishnah, and later we're going to see that it's not a mishnah. In other words, it's not something you can rely on. There's a term that the Gemara will use. Eino mishnah means something that you can't rely on. So just to go over that last point with greater clarity, we're going to see a stam mishnah involving a masreik. And the Gemara will end up telling us that the halacha will not follow that mishnah, indicating that the rule of halacha kistam is not something that you can really rely on. In response to that, it will be said over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish that particular mishnah of masreik is not a reliable source. So that when you have mishnayos that are considered authoritative and they appear in a stam fashion, you will rule like them. In this particular case, we have a mishnah that itself has a weakness to it, and hence it's termed Eino Mishnah. The Gemara. Amalei, v'hotnan, do we not have the following? Now, if we try to follow the pronouns in this, Amalei, he said to him, so it would appear that you have Rabbi Nachum raising a question, presenting a question to Rabbi Avo, and saying that after all these rules that you've said, what about the following situation? V'hotnan, we have the following Stam Mishnah, and after the framed section, you'll see the Gemara is saying that we don't follow this particular source, even though it's Stam. So now we get into the details. The Mishnah says Masreik, and we have a double underlining, highlighting the two different kinds of Masreik, of combs that are used for combing flax, combs that are used for, that's pishtan, and combs that are used for tzemer, that for combing wool. Masreik shel pishtan shenitlu shinov v'nishtayru bo shtayim tameos, a comb that most of its teeth have been removed, but two remain tameos. That means that it's still considered fit as a utensil, as a kli, and since it's still fit for use, it's capable of becoming tomei. Or if it was tomei, it remains tomei. V'achas tahora, if there remains only one tooth in this comb, so it is no longer considered useful, and hence it will not be able to become tomei. V'kulon shenitlu achas b'fnei atzmon tameos. All that have teeth that were removed in a staggered fashion, those kind of combs are still useful. there's a actually we must correct ourselves. There was a mistake we just made. That's kulan shnitlu achas b'fnei atzmon tameos means the teeth of the comb have been removed and they're not attached to the original comb itself, but they just have teeth, separate teeth. Those are tome. They are considered useful. They have a function, and hence they're subject to the rules of tuma, of ritual impurity, if that be the case. Shel tzemer shenitlu shinov achas mibeintayim tohar. A woolen comb whose teeth were missing in a staggered fashion. That's nitlu shinov achas mibeintayim, one between the other. Rashi says achas mibeintayim shemikol shloisha asmuchos, from any section of 3 successive teeth. So nitlo hamsoyas, the middle one was removed. So for every group of 3 teeth, the middle one removed. That's torah. It's not fit for its original design function to function as a wool comb. If 3 teeth remain in the comb in a successive fashion without any gaps, so the comb is tome. Torah. If the outer comb, the outer tooth, that is, of these 3, we have 3 teeth that remain in a wool comb, but one of those 3 happens to be the outermost tooth, which is generally wider or thicker than the others, so that even though you have 3 teeth remaining in this wool comb, 3 successive teeth, one of them is the chitzona. So it is no longer functional as a wool comb, therefore torah. Nitlu shnayim v'ason lemilkat. If you took 2 teeth out of this comb and made it into a type of, say, tweezers, tameos, so they're functional, and hence they are subject to kabbalas tuma. Achas v'skin l'nero l'mituach tameo. One isolated tooth of a wool comb that you established, you set aside for cleaning out candles, or for mituach. Rashi says, Lifrois beged kein achayotim shemoischim oros b'masmerim. He would use this tooth in lieu of a nail or a peg in order to stretch materials, like people that are preparing skins will attach the skin in a taut fashion in order to stretch it out through the use of these pegs or nails, and in this case he's using the tooth of the comb in that capacity. So since it's functional, so it's tameh, it's subject to kabbalas tuma, as is a kli. So we just finished reading a Tanaic source, a fair amount of detail regarding 2 different kinds of combs and their teeth, and there's no name in this source. And yet we hold that the halacha does not follow this Tanaic source. So is that not a problem for that which we said before, that a stam mishnah is to be relied upon for following as the halacha? Omar lei, so Rabbi Yevamos says back to Rabbi Nochum, he says, bar mino dahi, besides that mishnah, the Rabbi Yochanan of Reish Lakish Damitravayu zu eino mishnah. This source regarding the comb is simply an unauthoritative, it's lacking authority, and then hence it doesn't pose a problem to our rules of pshat, of halachic decision making. And now the Gemara goes through a number of stages, and we have triangles used to highlight these stages, And on the side under the Mivneh heading, these are Nisyonos, attempts lahasbir my time on Rav Yochanan Zuhaina Mishnah. What is weak about this? What is lacking in this source that leads Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish to say that this is an unreliable source? My time. As we go through the Gemara, we mentioned there are three sources, but at each stage, after stage 1 and stage 2, the Gemara will show how whatever objection is being raised is really not an objection. Amar Rav Huna bar Manoch. In response to the question of my time, why is this called an Eino Mishnah? So Rav Huna bar Manoch says in the name of Mishmei de Rav Idi Brei de Rav Ika, Mishum de Kashi Reishel L'Seifa. There is a inherent contradiction between the beginning, the early part, and the latter part of the source. The Kotari. It says in this source, Shel Tzemer Shenitlu Shinov Achas Mi Beintayim Tahor. A wool comb where one tooth was removed from between two other teeth, so it's incapable of being Mekabel Tumah. If two teeth would remain in a continual fashion, one next to the other, so then we would infer that it's capable of being Mekabel Tumah. The reason that the Mishnah described the Nitlu Shino of Asmetayim is because of that very phenomenon. There were no, you didn't have any succession of two teeth. But if two successive teeth remained in place, it would be considered functional, hence Tomei. For Hodar Toni, and then in the same source you say, Nishtayru Bo Gimel Tomei, that if three teeth remain in succession, then it's Mekabel Tumah, and we would infer from that Gimel in Shtayim Loi, that if only three remain in succession, it's Mekabel Tumah, but if two, that's not enough. So, follow the dashed underlining. The line before, we dashed underline Shtayim b'mokom echad, Tomei. Here, Shtayim, lo, not. It's inherently contradictory. Umay Kusha. The Gemara responds and says, how does this demonstrate any difficulty? Dilma, maybe ha b'gavyaisa, ha b'baraisa. It depends on which teeth we are talking about. As far as the detailed explanation of gavyaisa and braisa, Rashi has a lengthy explanation. He actually has two different explanations, and he prefers the second one, and that the comb described here has two rows of teeth, one an inner row and one an outer row, and depending on which row it is, the standard will be different, so that there is no contradiction. Two teeth that are successive will be functional if it's one of those rows, and two teeth in succession will not be tomei if it's the other kind of row. Elo mehacha. Rather, from the following, the Gemara goes on, we will see that the source is problematic. Tikotani. It said in the source, V'kulon shenitlu achas b'fnei atzmon tameos. All of these that the teeth were removed from the comb, and you have isolated individual teeth, so they are tameos. They're subject to Kabbalas Tumah. Even if you didn't designate it for a particular function. Ema Seifa. And then you continue reading the source, and it says, Achas v'skino l'ner l'mituach tamea. If you have an isolated tooth of a comb, and you designated it for cleaning out candles, or for stretching materials as a peg, then it's Mekabel Tumah. And then we would infer Hiskino in, lo Hiskino lo. Only if you designated it, giving it significance and functionality, then it's Mekabel Tumah. But if you didn't designate it, you have just an isolated comb or tooth of a comb, it wouldn't be makabel tuma. Now, 2 lines ago we said it is makabel tuma. Here we're saying that only if it's iskina would it be makabel tuma. If not, it's not makabel tuma. That would be contradictory, and that would show that the source is unreliable. Omar Abaye, umay kushya. What's the problem over here? There's no problem. Dilma haba katayu. Maybe it all depends on whether the tooth is still in the case, the frame of the comb, or it's literally an isolated tooth that's been disconnected from the holder, from the comb holder. In other words, you have teeth of a comb that are set into something called a kat. The kat being the handle that holds the teeth. So that now Rashi explains that if you have the kat with a single tooth in it, that doesn't need any special designation. It has significance, it has some functionality. However, if you have an isolated tooth removed from the comb, then you need to have it designated in order for it to be makabel tuma. Omer Rav Papa, umay kushya. Rav Papa has his resolution. Fidilma haba katinta haba alinta. Maybe a distinction can be made, he says, between a katinta is a very fine tooth versus a thick type of tooth. The Rashi says alinta avois ve'enam tzrichos beis yad. The thicker tooth it doesn't need a handle, whereas a thinner one would need a handle. So once you can see room for making a distinction, therefore there is no contradiction. One section refers to one situation, the other section refers to the other situation. Elo, stage 3, the reason that the source that we saw in the second line from the top, the masrek source, is not considered authoritative, even though it appears as a stam, is ela mishum de mesaimi bo davkani zu divrei Rabbi Shimon. The experts in Mishnayos, the davkani, these are people that are very careful and precise in their Mishnayos learning. They attach as a sign off to the source that this is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon. So it doesn't qualify as a stam mishnah to begin with. And therefore, the original rule that halacha will be like a stam mishnah, that still holds. As far as the case of masrek, and you're telling us that we don't follow its ruling, that doesn't pose any question to our rules of pshat, because this is not an example of a stam mishnah to begin with.